Let's bring in Sarah Sanders now from the White House, obviously press secretary. I'm sure, Sarah, you've been following all this from last night till today through the president's rally and beyond. What are your thoughts? It looks as though another critic of the president was targeted, Robert De Niro, and then Joe Biden, who might be running for president against the president, who's also been critical of him. What do you make of this?
Look, the president's been made aware of the latest developments that have taken place this morning. And as he said yesterday, and as he has continued to say from day one of taking office, that we condemn violence in all forms. And this is a despicable act and certainly something that should never take place in America.
Absolutely. 1 hour ago, the president tweeted this out. A very big part of the anger we see today in our society is caused by the purposely false and inaccurate reporting of the mainstream media that I refer to as fake news. It has gotten so bad and hateful that it is beyond description. Mainstream media must clean up its act fast. What is the president saying there?
Certainly the media has a role to play in this process. When 90% of the coverage about this president is negative, despite the historic successes, when the ideas of perpetuated and continued of negativity, that is not helpful for the American discourse. And certainly the president is calling on everyone to come together. And if you have a problem with one another, let's voice that, but let's do so peacefully, and let's do that at the ballot box.
Yeah, we saw what happened to Steve Scalise, where he was shot. We saw what happened to you and your family in the restaurant, and we have Maxine Waters that's calling for people to get into the face of folks in the administration that they don't agree with. Hillary Clinton was saying that we won't be civil until Democrats are in power. And I'm not saying it's just Democrats, because it's on both sides. But is this a good reminder to us that we need to all take a step back? And we can disagree about politics, but is this pretty scary to you, where we're seeing more and more violence and threats?
Absolutely. And as the president said yesterday, political violence has no place in our country, and it's certainly something that we won't tolerate, we won't stand for, and we're going to continue to condemn it. We're going to continue to provide every resource possible that the federal government has to not only prevent and stop these types of incidents, but also get to the bottom of who is truly responsible for this. And that is the person who sent these suspicious packages, and we're going to continue to do all that we can to help support law enforcement, the Secret Service, the FBI, to make sure we find out and determine who exactly that was.
Sarah, what is Homeland Security doing right now? You know, the FBI is taking the lead. Local police forces are fanning out, whether it's Delaware, Maryland, New York, or Los Angeles, or Florida, wherever city Debbie Wasserman Schultz is in. So I'm just wondering, what is Homeland Security's role?
They're doing everything they can. They're working with state and local law enforcement, with FBI, with the United States Secret Service, every level of law enforcement that has a role to play. We are working with them and coordinating and making sure they have the resources needed to get to the bottom of this.
Sarah, last night at the Wisconsin rally, the president called for a more civil tone. He said the nation must stop treating political opponents as being morally defective. Is the president going forward going to change his approach to these rallies and criticizing his opponents?
I think you saw that last night. Certainly the president is going to continue to point out contrasts of policy between Democrats and Republicans. People absolutely have a choice to make on what they believe in, and it couldn't be clearer. And we're going to see that happen in the next couple of weeks when the elections take place. And the president's going to continue to lay out that case. But at the same time, we're condemning violence and calling on all Americans to come together.
Hey, you know what's interesting, Sarah, is that I think we get it more than most because we knew the president before he was president. As you see him go head-to-head with Marco Rubio, and it got personal. He goes head-to-head with Ted Cruz, and it got personal. He goes head-to-head with Rand Paul, and it was personal. He has healed those friendships, and now everybody's working together. Do you think the president could go further to further define that he just is competing on issues, not with people, and that it is not personal, and maybe he could go that extra mile and further define that?
Look, the president did exactly that last night. Scott Walker was also somebody that the president campaigned against at one point, and he was out as his biggest champion last night, laying out the case and the difference between Democrats and Republicans. There is a major political, philosophical difference between Democrats and Republicans, and there's nothing wrong with pointing those differences out. There is something wrong with taking that to a point of violence that we are looking at that's taken place over the last 24 hours. The president has condemned that. All of us have, but certainly perfectly acceptable. And frankly, the president's responsibility to lay out the political differences between Democrats and Republicans as we head into a midterm election. The president has had a historic first 2 years in office. He's got a great story to tell, and he should be able to express that and talk about it and lay out those contrasts.
I know that some packages have been sent in the past to Republicans as well. All of these in the last day or so, or last 2 days, have been Democratic, liberal political figures. But you're in the spotlight. You work for this administration. There are crazy people out there. Has this changed the way you're living your life?
Things changed the way I was living my life over the last several months. Let's not forget that an MSNBC anchor actually said someone should wring my neck, and a Washington Post columnist said I deserved a lifetime of harassment. I was the first White House press secretary in the history of the White House to have United States Secret Service, and they don't do that because somebody said nasty things. They do that because there are credible threats. Absolutely, I think I understand this and the threats that people are experiencing over the last 24 hours. I think it's despicable. I think it's horrible. And I think that's why the president is exactly right that we have to continue to condemn this violence, continue to call it out, and call it exactly what it is.
Sure. And the president's called for a more civil tone. But, Sarah, there are some on the political left who are already saying, hey, look, all this stuff with these bombs being mailed around, that's the president's fault.
I think it is absolutely disgraceful that one of the first public statements we heard from CNN yesterday was to put the blame and the responsibility of this despicable act on the president and on me personally, when the person that is responsible for this is the person who made and created and put these suspicious packages in the hands and in the arms of innocent American citizens. That's the person responsible, and I find that disgraceful that that was one of the first statements, is that they made this and tried to put the blame on the president.
Right. And you answered Jeff Zucker right on Twitter right away, and he has not responded. We see publicly, but we did see the New York Times today, and they do have a fantasy scenario from fiction writers talking about one scenario where the president gets assassinated, where the Secret Service collaborates with Russians to kill him. What's your reaction to that?
I find it to just be absolutely abhorrent and disgraceful, and it's exactly the type of thing the president was talking about. Is that type of activity is certainly not helpful, certainly not in this time.
I'm shocked they ran it today.
I find it incredibly shocking that they would run that today.
Will the president be making any remarks about what we've already seen develop? You know, the scrambling to find out what's going on in Delaware. We assume something to do with Joe Biden's address. And this morning we wake up and find out that Robert De Niro's restaurant had a package in it which was brought to the Bronx Detonation Center. So we assume it had bomb-making materials inside. Do you know, I know you had a schedule set up. Do you want to announce anything that might be changing?
I can tell you that the president has been briefed on both of these latest incidents by Chief of Staff Kelly, and probably receive further briefing later this morning. Yesterday, he was briefed by the United States Secret Service, the FBI, the Department of Justice, and DHS heads that we're continuing to monitor this, look for ways to prevent it, and frankly find out at the end of the day who is fully responsible for this, and make sure that we bring justice to that individual or individuals.
There's a tweet from John Brennan, response to the president. He's one of the ones that was supposed to get one of these packages. This is the one they sent to CNN. He just tweeted this. He said, "Stop blaming others. Look in the mirror. Your inflammatory rhetoric, insults, lies, and encouragement of physical violence are disgraceful. Clean up your act. Try to act presidential. The American people deserve much better. By the way, your critics will not be intimidated into silence." What's your reaction?
Look, the president, I think, could not have been more presidential yesterday when he spoke directly to the American people. He condemned this violence. Let's not get lost in who is responsible for this heinous act. It is the person who made and sent these suspicious packages. Let's not forget that that is ultimately the person that is responsible and will be held responsible by this administration.
You had no reaction directly to John Brennan, who seems to be breaking with tradition as a former head of the CIA and becoming what seems to be a pundit?
I think we've made our opinions on former Director Brennan pretty clear over the past several months. Certainly don't support the type of activity that he is engaged in, and don't think it's becoming of somebody that is a former director of the intelligence agency that he was.
Side note, of course, the midterm elections are just a little less than 2 weeks away. I know the president and his team have announced that apparently he's going to make some other stops. Given what's going on with these packages, will he continue on this very aggressive campaigning with the rallies and whatnot, or are they going to pare things back, or what's going on?
Certainly, as of right now, the president continues to lay out the case and the political differences of Democrats and Republicans, as he certainly should. The future and history of our country is at stake, and Americans have a decision to make in the next couple of weeks, and the president's going to lay out the case for why Republicans have been successful over the last 2 years under his leadership. We have a booming economy. We have a massive amount of job creation, particularly in manufacturing. We have trade deals that everyone said couldn't be done. We have a national security issue at the border, and we have to decide whether or not we want law and order at the border or whether or not we want open borders. The president's going to lay out that case, and Americans are going to make a decision, and I think they're going to make the right one.
12 days and counting. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, thanks so much for giving us 15 minutes of your time this morning. You might be one of the busiest people in America. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Great to be with you.